My name is Grace Stone, and I was 31 the day my father gave my brother $1 million and gave me a sentence. We were standing in a rented hall outside Brindle, Pennsylvania. The whole family had come. My father raised a glass, called my brother Ryder up front, and handed him a check to start his own business. Everyone clapped. Then he turned to me, calm as a closing door, and said, "Go earn your own." I didn't argue. I smiled, thanked him, and sat back down. But what I did with the next 12 months, and what my grandfather did quietly, where none of them could see, is the reason a lawyer would one day slide an envelope across a table and make my father scream like a man losing his mind. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people meet impossible families and quiet women keep their receipts. If a story has ever made you sit up a little straighter, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Let me take you back into that hall. It smelled faintly of sawdust, because half the guests were men from the lumberyard who'd come straight from a shift. The check my father held was real, printed large enough to read from the back row. $1 million. Ryder took it the way he took everything, like it had been waiting for him his whole life. He grinned, kissed our mother's cheek, said something about disruption and vision. People laughed in the right places. My father, Gerald Stone, watched him the way other men watch a sunrise. Then he found me near the dessert table. I want you to understand he wasn't cruel about it. Cruel would have been easier. He was gentle, almost fatherly, when he said the words that closed a door I'd been knocking on for 31 years. Go earn your own. The room didn't gasp. That's the part that stayed with me. They just nodded, like a daughter being told to fend for herself was the natural order of things. My mother smiled into her wine. My aunts touched my arm and told me how proud they were of Ryder. And at the far end of the head table sat my grandfather, Walter Stone, 81 years old, the man who'd built the whole lumber business from one truck and a bad knee. When Ryder took the check, the entire room applauded. Walter didn't. He sat with his hands folded, looking at me, and he didn't move them an inch. I noticed. I think he wanted me to. I just didn't understand yet what it meant. Here's the thing, nobody clapping that night knew about me. None of it surprised me. I'd been reading the room my whole life. In our family, Ryder brought the energy into a space, and I brought the spreadsheets. He was 2 years younger and treated like the firstborn son out of a story. I was the one who did the taxes. I started keeping the family's books at 19, the year my father's bookkeeper quit, and nobody else could read a ledger. I caught a vendor double billing us $8,000. I never got a thank you. I just got handed more. By 25, I'd passed my CPA exams and taken a job at a small accounting firm 2 towns over. My family knew the title and never once asked what I did with it. My mother had a way of summing it up that I could never quite shake. She'd said it years before, kindly, the way she said most of the worst things. Ryder carries the name. You just have it. I used to think that was wisdom. That night, driving back to my apartment across town, I finally heard it for what it was. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that, because people expect tears here. I made coffee, opened a fresh notebook, and at the top of the first page I wrote the only thing I was sure of. Start. I didn't know what I was starting. I only knew I was done waiting to be picked. The next morning, I drove out Route 9 to the lumberyard. I told myself I was just dropping off the quarterly numbers. That was a lie I let myself keep. The truth was, I wanted to see my grandfather. Walter was already there when I pulled in, because Walter was always already there. His chipped blue enamel mug sat on the counter where it had sat since before I was born. He poured me a coffee I didn't ask for and slid it over without a word. I told him about the check. I told him what Dad had said. I expected comfort. Maybe an apology on my father's behalf. Walter didn't do either. He looked at me over that old mug and asked one question. So what's the plan? Not are you okay? Not that's not fair. What's the plan? I started to say I didn't have one and stopped, because I did. I'd written it down the night before in a word. He listened while I talked it through, This half-formed idea of doing for small shops what I'd always done for free for my family. Clean books, smart money, a way out of the hole. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said the thing I'd carry like a stone in my pocket for the next year. I'm not betting on the loud one. I'm betting on the one who shows up. Outside, the first rain of the day started to tick against the tin roof of the office. He told me to come back the next day. He said he wanted to show me the old books. I didn't know why yet. You have to understand what stone lumber and supply meant in Brindle. My grandfather started it in 1968 with one flatbed truck. By the time I was born, it was the place every contractor, every weekend carpenter, every widow fixing a porch came through. It put half the town's roofs over half the town's heads. My father had run it for 15 years, and he ran it well. But he'd never built it. He'd inherited it. I think that gap lived in him like a splinter he couldn't reach. To prove he was a builder, not just an heir, he'd bet big. He'd taken out a loan to put up a second warehouse on the edge of town, a fancy expansion he talked about at every dinner. And he'd carved $1 million out of the family's future to crown Ryder the next great stone. People in town already spoke about my brother like he was the heir apparent. Nobody mentioned the daughter who balanced the books. I wasn't bitter about being left out of the story. I was something colder and more useful. I was paying attention. One afternoon at the yard, sorting old files for Walter, I came across the loan paperwork for the new warehouse. I read it the way I read everything. Slowly. Twice. My father hadn't just borrowed against the business. He'd borrowed against what he expected to inherit from Walter someday. He was spending money he didn't have yet, on a promise no one had put in writing. I didn't say a word. I just filed it away. In the cabinet and in my head. My first real client found me by accident. His name was Tom Vasquez, and he ran a one-man repair shop off Main Street, the kind of place that fixes your lawnmower and your marriage in the same afternoon. Tom was drowning. He owed 3 vendors, his books were a shoebox, and the bank had stopped returning his calls. A mutual friend mentioned that the stone girl was good with numbers. He called me on a Tuesday, embarrassed, ready to be talked down to. I didn't have money to lend him. I want to be clear about that, because this is where people expect a rich relative to swoop in. There was no rich relative. There was just me and a notebook. So I did the only thing I knew how to do well. I went through every number in that shoebox. I restructured what he owed, found him a small line of credit at a credit union that still believed in handshakes, and renegotiated 2 of his vendor contracts down to something a human could pay. I charged him a modest fee and wrote up a real agreement, signed and dated, so we both knew exactly where we stood. That night, I gave the thing a name. I wrote it across the top of a new file. Stone Ventures. It wasn't a fund. It wasn't anything yet. It was a name and a promise to keep the books clean. 2 weeks later, Tom sent me 2 more men from his street. They came in embarrassed, too. They left with a plan. I started to think the thing I'd written down might actually have a shape. While I was rebuilding Tom Vasquez's shoebox, my brother was throwing a party. Ryder used a slice of his million to launch his venture in style. He leased an office with exposed brick and a wall of glass, the kind of place that costs more to look successful in than to actually be successful. He hired a friend to design a logo, another friend to run social media, and a third friend nobody could explain. The launch had a bar. My parents came. My mother wore a new dress and told everyone her son was an entrepreneur. My father stood by the window with his arms crossed, proud the way men are proud of things they've purchased. I went, because not going would have been a statement, and I wasn't ready to make statements yet. I stood near the back and watched the money move in the wrong direction. At one point, a man Ryder was courting as an investor drifted over to me, mistaking me for staff, and asked a real question about margins. I answered it plainly. He blinked, then asked another, and we talked numbers for 10 minutes while Ryder watched from across the room. I saw my brother's smile tighten. He didn't like that the investor was listening to me. He liked it even less when the man shook my hand instead of his on the way out. Ryder found me before I left. You don't have to lurk at my party doing math, he said, smiling for the room. I told him I wasn't lurking. I told him I was learning. If you've ever watched a family pour everything into the loud one while you quietly built something real, you already know how that smile felt. Stay with me. It gets better, and it gets earned. Hit subscribe so the next chapter finds you. The whispers started about a month later. They were soft, which is how the worst ones always are. Word went around the family that Grace was bitter, that I was jealous of my brother's gift, that I'd started some little side thing out of spite to embarrass the family. I knew exactly where it came from. Ryder had a gift for stories, and the one he was telling now was about a sister who couldn't be happy for him. My mother called me. She didn't ask how my work was going. She asked me to please not make things awkward at the next dinner. Don't embarrass us, she said, like I was the embarrassment in a family handing a grown man $1 million to play office. I didn't fight it. I want to underline that, because fighting it was the trap. If I argued, I'd be the bitter daughter they'd already decided I was. So I stayed quiet, and I kept working. And I let the only argument I trusted make itself. One of my aunts had believed Ryder at first. Then her bakery's books fell apart. And she called me, half hoping I'd say no. I didn't. I fixed her quarter, found her $4,000 she'd been losing to a bad processor, and never mentioned the things she'd said about me. She did the math on her own. The next time the family gathered, she sat by me. People notice who shows up when the lights are on and the cameras are off. I told her the only line I'd allow myself. You can believe what's loud or you can read what's written. I'll be over here, writing. By midsummer, I had 6 clients, then 8. Stone Ventures stopped being a name on a file and started being a small, stubborn engine. I'd take a struggling shop, clean its books, find it a little capital through people who trusted my word, and take a fair cut when it worked. Then I'd put my cut back in and do it again. I wasn't getting rich. I was getting real. The work cost me everything else. I'd be at the firm by 7, with my own clients until 10 at night, and asleep before I remembered to eat. I didn't have much of a life outside the ledgers. That was my flaw, if you want one. I carried everything myself, and let almost no one close enough to help. It made me good at the work, and lonely in the world. Most evenings, I'd swing by the yard with a folder for Walter, even when I didn't need to. He'd started asking me questions that went deeper than a grandfather making conversation. How did I structure the small deals? What happened to a client's debt if a shop folded? Who held the risk, and who held the paper? He asked the way a man asks when he's measuring something. One night, rain ticking on the tin roof again, he asked me to write it all down for him. The whole shape of how Stone Ventures worked. I thought he was just curious. I made him a 1-page summary, clean and plain, and didn't think twice about it. I should have asked him why he wanted it. I was too tired and too proud to wonder what my grandfather was building of his own. My father heard I was doing well, and it landed on him like an accusation. He didn't congratulate me. He summoned me. I drove out to the house on a Sunday and found him in his study, the door already half closed. He'd been hearing my name around town, attached to other people's money, and he didn't like the company it kept. He came to the point fast. I was not to use the name Stone for my little operation. The name belongs to the business, he said. My business. He framed it as protecting the family. We both knew it was a test. He wanted to see if I'd fold the way I always had, trade the thing I'd built for the privilege of his approval. I thought about every year I'd kept his books for free. I thought about the check he'd handed Ryder. And I gave him the quietest answer I had. You told me to earn my own. I'm earning it. His jaw worked. He told me I'd regret being difficult. I told him I'd already filed the business name properly, with the state, months ago. That part was true, and it was the part that mattered. He could be angry. He couldn't undo a filing. I left before either of us said something we couldn't take back. Driving home across town, I realized the name had become the whole fight, which meant it had become important, which meant I'd never give it up. He'd told me to earn my own. He just hadn't expected me to keep the family name while I did it. My brother's million started to leak by fall. I didn't gloat. I barely had time to notice, until he made me notice. Ryder called me on a Thursday, and for the first time in our lives, he needed something I had. The exposed brick office was bleeding rent. Two of his friend partners had drifted off. His big investor, the one who'd shaken my hand at the party, had